The battlefield still smoked beneath a bruised dawn. The scent of iron and pine clung to the air, heavy and sharp, as if the forest itself mourned what had been lost. Alpha King Kale stood among the fallen, his sword slick with blood that was no longer warm. Around him, the howls of his warriors faded into silence, replaced by the distant crackle of fire and the beating of wings overhead. Victory had been won, but it didn't feel like triumph. It felt like a debt unpaid. His gaze swept the field until it stopped on movement near the ridge. A line of prisoners knelt in the mud, their heads bowed low, armor shattered and spirits broken. All except one, she stood. Her armor was dented, her braid unraveling, but her spine was straight as a drawn blade. Blood streaked her face, yet her eyes, silver gray and steady, held the calm of the moon on still water. Kale had seen warriors beg, cry, curse, and die. He had never seen one stand so silently, as if daring the world to try and break her. The wind shifted, carrying the faint perfume of rain-soaked jasmine, impossible in the dead of winter. It brushed across Kale's senses like memory, stirring something deep, something wordless. "Who is she?" he asked. His beta stepped forward, Ilara of the Eastern Ridge, a soldier under the rebel general. She killed 6 before surrendering. They call her the Ghost of the Valley. Kale's jaw tightened. A ghost. She looked more alive than any soul here. He strode closer, his shadow stretching long across the mud. "You refuse to kneel before your alpha?" he asked, voice low but edged in steel. The woman's lips curved faintly, not quite a smile. "You are not my alpha." The words cut through the morning stillness like a blade. Warriors glanced up, eyes wide. To defy a king meant death. But she did not flinch. Her chin lifted, her gaze steady. "Before we begin this story, tell us, where in the world are you listening from, and what time is it there?" "Now let's begin." Kale studied her in silence. Beneath the blood and defiance, there was something ancient in her stillness. A quiet power that made his instincts twist. For a heartbeat, he thought he saw her eyes shimmer, not with fear, but with light, moonlight. "Bind her," one guard muttered, stepping forward with a chain. Kale raised his hand. "No chains?" The men hesitated. "Me, king?" "She walks beside me," he said. "And a wolf binds courage. And a wolf binds courage." Her gaze flickered to him then, puzzled for the first time. He turned away before she could read the storm behind his calm. They marched back to the capital through a forest heavy with fog. The pack trailed behind them, dragging the wounded and the captured. Ilara walked beside Kale, silent except for the soft rhythm of her boots against the frost. At times, he could feel her presence like heat on his skin. At others, it felt like she wasn't there at all, like a dream that vanished when you tried to touch it. When the palace gates came into view, gold beneath the fading sun, Kale looked at her once more. The dying light caught the curve of her cheek, the cold fire in her eyes. "Why did you fight?" he asked quietly. "For freedom," she said. "And for those your armies forget." Her voice was low, steady, unafraid. There was no hatred in it, only truth. Kale didn't answer. He turned his gaze toward the sky, where the moon was already rising, pale and perfect in the early dusk. It watched them both, cold and knowing. That night, the palace slept under silver light. Kale could not. The battle replayed behind his eyes, but always ended with her face, the defiance, the strange calm. He poured himself a drink and sat by the window, the wind sighing through the curtains like a living thing. Kale felt it resonate through his chest. The call of his kind. The call of something older than blood. He rose, restless, and stepped into the courtyard. The moon was full above, drenching the stones in white fire. Beneath its glow stood Ilara. She wasn't supposed to be free. 2 guards lay asleep by the gate, untouched. She lifted her head slowly, as if she had sensed him before he arrived. The moonlight wrapped around her like silk. "What are you doing here?" he demanded, voice quieter than he meant it to be. Her gaze didn't waver. "The moon called," she said simply. I answered. He wanted to question her further, but the words caught in his throat. The air shimmered faintly around her. For an instant, the shadows bent toward her, reverent. Then, the wind shifted, and it was gone. She stood there as only a woman again, mud-stained, mortal, beautiful in her defiance. He took a step closer. "You are either brave," he murmured, "or foolish, or both," she replied. Her eyes glimmered with something he couldn't name. Something that made the Alpha King, ruler of blood and fire, feel uncertain. When she turned to leave, he let her. But as she disappeared down the corridor, her scent lingered. Cool, wild, laced with jasmine and moonlight. That night, Kale didn't. He sat beneath the window until dawn, the image of her standing beneath the moon carved into his thoughts like a scar. And as the first light touched the horizon, he understood one thing with absolute clarity. The Alpha King had claimed a warrior, but somewhere in the quiet between his heartbeats, he knew he had touched something far greater, something divine. Rain drummed softly against the palace roof, washing away the last traces of the battlefield. The world outside was quiet now, but inside Elara's chamber, silence had a sharper edge. Her room was carved from marble and trimmed in gold, too beautiful to be real, too polished to breathe. The window before her was tall and arched, its bars shaped like vines that glimmered beneath the light, a cage gilded enough to pretend it wasn't one. She pressed her palm to the cold metal, her breath ghosting across the glass, and wondered if freedom had a sound. Kale had not spoken to her since he brought her here. He had left her with food, servants, and silence. 3 things that made the walls close in tighter each day. When she slept, she dreamed of the forest, of snow beneath her boots, of wolves running beside her. She always woke before the moon faded, heart pounding with a name she didn't remember calling. The door creaked open, breaking her trance. Kale stepped inside, his presence filling the room like a shift in the air. He wasn't wearing armor this time, just a dark tunic, simple, unguarded. Yet he still looked like someone born of battle. "You don't eat," he said, nodding toward the untouched tray on the table. Elara turned slightly, her voice calm. "I eat when I'm free." His eyes flickered with something unreadable. "You are not a prisoner." Her lips curved faintly. And opened the door. Kale studied her, the stubborn line of her shoulders, the faint cut along her jaw where her helmet had split. There was strength in her stillness, a fire that even defeat hadn't dimmed. "You fought well," he said finally. "Few men could have done what you did." "I wasn't fighting men," she replied. "He was fighting monsters wearing crowns." His jaw tightened, but there was no anger in his eyes. Only something quieter, pain perhaps. "Is that what you see when you look at me? Why see a king who mistakes fear for loyalty?" The words struck deeper than any sword. He stepped closer before he could stop himself. The scent of rain and iron lingered between them. "You speak like someone who's never ruled," he said softly. "And you," she whispered back, "like someone who's never knelt." For a long moment, neither spoke. The fire cracked in the hearth, throwing gold over their faces. Kale's eyes, dark as storm clouds, searched hers for something he couldn't name. There was no hatred there, only defiance and a strange calm, as if she'd already accepted every punishment he could give. He turned toward the window, tracing a finger along the golden bars. "You think I built this cage for you," he murmured. "But sometimes a king builds walls around himself and forgets where the gates are." Her heart stirred at that, though she didn't let it show. "But then you are more trapped than I am." Kale faced her again, and for the first time he smiled. Not the cruel smirk of a conqueror, but something small human. "Perhaps," he said. "But still, you'll dine in the hall tonight, not as a prisoner. As my guest." Elara's expression didn't change, though her pulse quickened. "A guest behind golden bars." He didn't answer. The rain softened as he left, his footsteps echoing down the corridor until they were gone. By evening, the servants arrived with a gown of silver silk. They said it was custom. Every guest of the Alpha King must wear light before darkness. Elara tried to refuse, but one glance at the guards reminded her she had no choice. She dressed, the fabric whispering against her skin, and let them lead her through the torchlit halls. The great hall was alive with laughter and wine. Music hummed low, like a heartbeat beneath conversation. Nobles looked up when she entered, their whispers curling like smoke. Kale stood at the far end, his gaze finding her instantly. He extended a hand, and though every instinct screamed to refuse, she walked forward. "Lady Elara," he said, voice low. "You sit beside me." The title startled her. No one had ever called her that. She sat, her back straight, her hands resting lightly on the table. The meal began, roasted meat, honeyed bread, spiced wine, but she barely tasted any of it. She felt their eyes, their curiosity, their fear. Yet it was Kale's gaze that burned most. "You stare at me as though I were your enemy," he said quietly. "You are, and yet," he said, his tone softening, "I don't want you to be." Her fingers stilled. "Then free me." His voice lowered further so only she could hear. "If I did, you would run, and something tells me the world would lose you forever." The hall blurred around them, the chatter, the light, the movement. For a heartbeat, it was only them beneath the steady watch of the moon through the window. Its silver glow fell upon her face, and Kale froze. the air changed. Her eyes caught the light, turning the faintest shade of silver blue, and for an instant, she seemed unreal, like moonlight given shape. The torches flickered. The music faltered. Cale blinked, and it was gone. The illusion, or whatever it was, vanished as quickly as it came. But something had shifted inside him. Later, when the guests were gone and the hall stood quiet, Elara returned to her room. The gown shimmered faintly in the moonlight. She pressed her hand to the golden bars again, whispering words older than the kingdom itself. The wind answered soft and cold against her skin. Across the palace, Cale stood on his balcony, watching the same moon. He could still see her eyes in his mind. Silver, endless, ancient. And though he didn't know why, his heart beat faster beneath the quiet sky, as if the goddess above had begun to watch him too. The Alpha King believed he had claimed a warrior, but the truth was simpler and far more dangerous. He had invited the moon into his house, and she was already learning the shape of his heart. Word count: 1,000 the night after the feast was colder than the ones before. The moon hung lower, veiled in thin clouds, and the palace halls were quieter, as if holding their breath. Cale stood alone in his chambers, unfastening the clasps of his tunic. Beneath the fabric, a scar stretched across his ribs, a mark left by the last blade that had tried to end him. It throbbed faintly tonight, a pulse that beat in rhythm with something unseen. He told himself it was an old wound, but it had never burned like this before. He poured water into a basin and tried to wash the ache away, yet his thoughts kept circling back to her. Elara. The name itself felt dangerous, soft and sharp all at once. She had sat beside him at the feast like a flame wrapped in silk, her silence louder than the music. He had ruled for years through strength and fear, but her defiance unsettled him more than 1,000 swords ever could. Outside, thunder rolled in the distance. He turned toward the window, half expecting to see her reflection in the glass. Instead, he saw lightning trace the clouds in silver arcs, like veins of light beneath the skin of the sky. The pain in his side deepened, pulling him to his knees. He gritted his teeth, one hand braced against the cold stone wall. The scent of rain filled the room, though the windows were shut. The door opened. A figure stood there, Elara, her hair unbound, eyes wide as if she'd felt his pain from across the hall. The guards were nowhere in sight, perhaps asleep, perhaps something else. She didn't ask permission. She crossed the room and knelt beside him, her voice low but steady. You're hurt. It's nothing, he wrathed. Her gaze dropped to the scar, now glowing faintly beneath his skin, an impossible silvery light pulsing from within. That's not nothing, she whispered. That's moonfire. He blinked, confused. Oh, what? Your wound, she said softly. It's not just from battle. It was marked by something old. You've been touched by power that doesn't belong to wolves. Her hand hovered over his side, uncertain, trembling. The reflection of light within them, silver and eternal, like the sea beneath the stars. She looked away quickly. Enough to save you, she murmured. He hesitated, then released her. Her fingers brushed his skin, and the world seemed to still. Her touch was cool, not like ice, but like water drawn from the heart of a moonlit lake. A faint glow spread beneath her palm, seeping through his ribs, quieting the fire that burned there. He exhaled slowly, the pain ebbing until it was only memory. When it was done, she drew her hand back and folded it into her lap. The glow faded, leaving only the steady flicker of candlelight between them. Cale looked down at the healed skin. No blood, no scar, just warmth. What are you? He asked quietly. Elara didn't answer. Her expression softened, but her silence was a wall he couldn't climb. She rose to her feet and turned toward the door. Rest, she said. You will need strength for what's coming. What's coming? And what's coming? The storm doesn't end when the rain stops, she replied, and left before he could ask more. Cale stared after her long after the door closed. The scent of her lingered, jasmine and something older, something celestial. He looked at his hands, flexing them, still feeling the echo of her touch. Every instinct warned him that she was dangerous. But another voice, quieter, buried deep within, told him she was the reason his heart had not turned to stone. He couldn't sleep. He wandered the halls until he found himself outside her chamber. The door was shut, light spilling from beneath it. He almost knocked, but something stopped him. Through the narrow space between door and frame, he saw her standing by the window, moonlight spilling over her like a veil. Her hands were clasped in front of her, her lips moving soundlessly in prayer. He couldn't hear the words, but the air itself seemed to respond. Soft wind coiling around her, stirring her hair as if invisible hands touched it. The moon outside brightened, its glow reaching through the bars. bathing her in light so pure it made his chest ache. She wasn't a prisoner in that moment. She was a force, something sacred, untamed, and he was the one behind the bars, looking in. He stepped back, quietly retreating before she noticed him. Back in his own chamber, he stood before the mirror and found the faint shimmer of silver still clinging to his skin. The memory of her touch burned softly beneath the surface. When dawn arrived, the pain had vanished completely, replaced by a strange calm he didn't understand. He dressed, readying himself for council, but his mind was not on politics or war. It was on the woman who healed him without words and left questions that no king could answer. Outside, the first rays of sun bled through the mist. The scent of jasmine drifted faintly through the corridors again, and far beyond the palace walls, deep in the forest, the wolves began to howl, long and low, as if calling to something ancient awakening beneath the same sky. Kale's hand brushed the healed scar once more, a quiet understanding settling in his chest. Whatever bound him to Ilara was older than blood, older than crowns, and for the first time in years, he felt the faint tremor of fear, not of battle, but of destiny. The days that followed blurred into whispers and watchful silence. The palace had begun to change since that night. The servants spoke more softly. The air grew tense with things unspoken. Kale's wound had vanished, leaving no trace but memory. Yet he could still feel the echo of her touch beneath his skin, like light trapped beneath glass. He tried to bury it under command and duty, but even in meetings, when voices droned about alliances and war, her name threaded through his thoughts like a song he couldn't forget. Ilara remained within her chamber, quiet but not idle. The guards noticed strange things when they passed. Candles flickering without flame, the scent of jasmine lingering long after the wind had gone still. She spent her nights staring at the moon, whispering to it like an old friend. The soldiers called her cursed, the servants called her blessed. Kale called her neither, though his heart leaned closer to the latter. The council urged him to act. "You should execute her," his advisor said one evening. "Whatever she is, she carries danger in her silence." Kale dismissed the warning, though doubt gnawed at him. He could not name what bound him to her, only that every instinct told him to keep her near. When the Harvest Moon Festival approached, a night of peace between packs, Kale decided she would attend. Perhaps, he told himself, it was to prove her loyalty, but deep down, it was to see if she would stand beside him not as a prisoner, but as something else. The evening arrived cloaked in starlight. The courtyard bloomed with lanterns, the marble floors polished to a mirror's sheen. Music drifted through the air, soft and ancient, the kind played when wolves remembered they were once human. Kale stood at the center of it all, surrounded by nobles and warriors, yet feeling strangely alone, until she entered. Ilara stepped into the courtyard dressed in midnight blue. Her gown shimmered like water beneath the stars, her hair loose, catching the light like threads of silver. Conversations faltered as she passed. Even the music seemed to hesitate. Kale's chest tightened. She was not meant for golden cages or mortal halls. She belonged to the sky. Their eyes met across the crowd. For a heartbeat, everything else faded. He crossed the space between them, the air thick with the scent of night-blooming flowers. "You came," he said quietly. "You ordered me to," she replied, though her voice lacked defiance. His lips curved slightly. "Then obey one more order. Dance with me." A murmur rippled through the gathering. No one refused the Alpha King, but Ilara's hesitation was not fear. It was memory, something old and buried flickering behind her eyes. Then she placed her hand in his. "Just one dance," she whispered. The music swelled as he led her to the open floor. Their steps found rhythm effortlessly, though neither spoke. His palm rested lightly against her back. Her fingers trembled once, then steadied. Around them, torches glowed brighter, as if the night itself bent closer to watch. The song was slow, haunting, its melody a thread that wound through them both. As they moved, Kale felt the pull of something larger than himself. Her heartbeat pressed against his chest, steady, certain, yet impossibly distant. Her eyes met his, and the stars seemed to reflect within them, silver and endless. He forgot who was king, who was captive. For that moment there was only them, the warrior and the wolf circling beneath the same sky that had once known their names. A wind stirred, sudden and cold. The torches flickered. Above, the moon dimmed for an instant, shadows slipping across its face. Ilara gasped quietly, her steps faltering. Kale steadied her, concern flickering through his eyes. "What is it?" She looked up at the heavens, her voice barely a whisper. "As something stirs. The stars. They're listening. Before he could respond, thunder rolled faintly in the distance, though no storm clouds marred the sky. The dancers around them continued, unaware, their laughter breaking the spell. Elora pulled her hand free, stepping back. "The moon watches us," she murmured. "And she remembers." Kale's confusion deepened. "Who are you?" Truly, her gaze met his, and for a heartbeat, she almost told him. But the music changed, faster now, lively, pulling the crowd's attention away. She turned from him, her voice trembling. "Ask me that when the moon no longer burns." She left before he could stop her, slipping into the shadows beyond the courtyard. Kale stood alone beneath the stars, the echo of her touch still on his hand, the words lingering like a riddle in the wind. Later, when the guests had gone and the palace slept, he found himself wandering to the edge of the garden. The air was cool, perfumed with jasmine and rain. There, near the fountain, he saw her again. Elora stood beneath the pale glow of the moon, head tilted as if listening to something far away. He didn't call her name. He only watched. The water behind her shimmered faintly, rippling with silver light that seemed to rise from within. For an instant, he thought he saw wings of light unfurl behind her, soft as mist. Then she turned and it was gone. "You shouldn't follow me," she said softly. "And then stop walking into my dreams," he replied. Her breath caught. "A dreams?" He stepped closer. "Every night since I met you, I've seen the same light, the same eyes. You haunt me." Her eyes glistened, not with pride but sorrow. "Then perhaps we are both haunted." A single drop of rain fell between them, though the sky was clear. It landed on her palm, glowing faintly before fading into her skin. She looked at it with a quiet dread. "The moon wanes," she whispered. "When it breaks, so will everything you know." Kale reached for her, but she stepped back, her gaze torn between longing and fear. "Go inside, Alpha. Tonight was a mistake." "Nothing about tonight was a mistake," he said, voice low. But she was already turning away, disappearing into the shadowed arches. The night held its breath, the stars dimmed, and somewhere above, the moon shivered behind a veil of clouds. Kale stood alone, heart unsteady, the echo of their dance still alive beneath his ribs. He didn't understand what she meant, but he knew this. The air had changed, fate had begun to move. And in the silence between the stars, something ancient whispered both their names. The night after the dance did not end for Elora. She sat awake long after the palace had gone silent, the echo of Kale's voice tangled with the rhythm of her heart. Every time she closed her eyes, she saw flashes, silver temples crumbling beneath the waves, hands reaching through mist, a crown of light breaking apart beneath a blood-red moon. She pressed her palms against her temples, but the visions would not stop. They weren't dreams. They were memories clawing their way back to life. When dawn broke, her chamber was heavy with the scent of rain and smoke. She rose and went to the window, watching the mist crawl across the forest below. Somewhere far beyond those trees lay the ruins of the old world, places whispered of by seers and forbidden to speak aloud. She had been told once that the gods had abandoned this realm long ago, but the pull in her chest said otherwise. Something out there still called her name. She hadn't noticed Kale standing in the doorway. He watched her quietly, his expression unreadable. "You haven't slept," he said. "I don't sleep easily," she replied without turning. "Because of me, because of what I can't remember." He stepped closer, his boots soft against the stone. "You speak as if you've lived two lives. Maybe I have." Her reflection in the glass met his gaze. "Tell me, Kale, have you ever felt that something inside you doesn't belong to this world?" He hesitated. "Every night since I was born." Their eyes met through the faint reflection, two souls standing between light and shadow. She turned fully, her voice lowering. "Then perhaps you understand why I can't breathe inside these walls. The past doesn't sleep here. It whispers." "What do you mean?" Elora's gaze drifted toward the far corner of the room, where the fire burned low. "There's power buried beneath this palace," she said. "I can feel it. The same kind that marked your wound. It's old, older than the bloodlines of wool. You've built your throne upon something that once belonged to the gods." He frowned, half in disbelief, half in fear. "You speak of myths." "Do I?" she murmured. "And then why does the moon tremble every time you draw your sword?" Kale stared at her, the truth pressing against the walls of his denial. He wanted to dismiss her words, yet part of him had always known there was something wrong with the kingdom's peace, something restless in the soil beneath it. "What are you?" he whispered. She smiled faintly. "That's what I'm trying to remember." A knock shattered the silence. His beta entered, bowing stiffly. "Your Majesty, the eastern border burns. The shadow clans have returned." Kale's composure hardened in an instant. How many? Enough to demand your presence. He turned back to Ilara. Her face had gone pale, as if the name itself stirred something buried. Starf, the Shadow Clans, she repeated. They were wiped out generations ago. Apparently not, Kale said. They move under the sign of the Crescent now. Her breath caught. The Crescent, the mark of the fallen goddess. She reached instinctively for her wrist, where beneath the fabric a faint scar glowed silver in the light. Kale saw it, his eyes narrowing. That mark, he said. I've seen it in the old text. Ilara pulled her sleeve down. You've seen nothing. He stepped forward, catching her wrist before she could turn away. You know something about them. Her voice trembled, but not with fear. With memory. I know they once followed her, the moon goddess. The one your kind forgot. His grip tightened. A goddess is a story told to children. Even why, she asked quietly, do her followers still bleed in your name? For a long moment, they stood locked in silence. The only sound was the wind pressing against the glass, the distant cry of wolves answering one another across the valley. Kale released her wrist, stepping back as if her touch burned. I ride at dawn, he said, his voice colder than before. Stay here. Do not interfere. You'll lose men if you go unprepared. I fought wars before you were born. Then fight this one with your eyes open, she said softly. Because what's coming isn't a war, it's a reckoning. He didn't answer. He turned and left, the door closing behind him with finality. Ilara sank into the chair by the fire, her hands trembling. The word reckoning echoed in her mind, carrying another voice layered beneath her own. A voice older, eternal. When she looked at the flames, she saw shapes forming within them. A wolf of silver fire bowing before a woman cloaked in light. The vision flickered, and a whisper followed, soft and aching in Ifa. Remember, Saluna. The name struck her like a blade through the heart. She gasped, clutching the edge of the chair as the world tilted. The name was hers. She didn't know how she knew it, only that it was true. Saluna. Tears blurred her vision. Fragments of another life bled through the cracks. Temples of stone, oceans of stars. A crown of silver resting on her brow. And beside her, a man with Kale's face kneeling in devotion, swearing to guard her light until death. She pressed her hand over her mouth, choking on the sound that rose in her throat. The past wasn't just whispering now, it was waking. Far away, the storm gathered over the eastern hills, lightning streaking the clouds in pale blue veins. Rode through the gates with his army, unaware that the shadow he rode to face had already begun to rise inside his own walls. And in the tower window, beneath the ghostly light of the fading moon, Ilara whispered the truth to the wind, for the first time in centuries. I am Saluna. The air trembled, as if the heavens themselves heard her. Then slowly, the moon began to wane. The morning Kale rode into battle. The sky was the color of steel. The wind carried the scent of rain and something older, something that hummed with foreboding. Ilara watched from her window, hands clenched around the golden bars. The memory of her name, Saluna, still echoed through her veins like fire and ice, burning against the fragile mortal shell she wore. The more she remembered, the less human she felt. Yet she could not reveal the truth. Not yet. Still, Kale had to face what waited beyond the border, and she had to decide whether to save him from the fate written in his blood. By midday, thunder rumbled over the eastern hills. The palace trembled faintly beneath it, though no storm had yet broken. The guards whispered that the Shadow Clans had summoned their witches again, that they fought with the ghosts of the forest on their side. Ilara knew better. What they called ghosts were remnants of her own power, echoes of the divine that had once walked freely among mortals. The storm was her doing once, in another life, and now it answered no one. As night fell, she could no longer bear the silence. She stepped out from her chamber, barefoot, her gown trailing across the stone like moonlight spilled into shadow. The guards tried to stop her, but her voice, soft, steady, froze them in place. He will die if I don't go. They didn't understand the words, but something in her tone made them step aside. The journey to the battlefield was long and haunted by wind. The forest whispered her name, leaves brushing against her as though in greeting. When she reached the ridge overlooking the plains, her breath caught. Fire dotted the darkness below like fallen stars. The war was chaos, wolves in human form tearing through mud and blood, steel clashing under the ghostly light of a fractured moon. And at the center of it all, Kale. His armor was broken, his blade heavy with exhaustion. He fought like the beast of legend he was. But the enemy circled him, shadows twisting into shapes that no man could slay. They weren't wolves. They were fragments of something older, darker, shards of the forgotten curse that had split the world when she fell from the heavens. The moon's power corrupted and bound to rage. Elira's heart seized. She could feel the energy building, a storm forming between life and death. Kale's sword slipped from his grasp, his body collapsing to one knee. The enemy lunged, their blades catching the dying light. "Enough," she whispered, and the air obeyed. The wind shifted. The ground quaked beneath her feet. Every torch and blade flickered blue as her power woke fully for the first time in centuries. She descended the hill like a specter cloaked in silver flame, her hair unbound, her eyes glowing with the calm fury of the moon. Warriors froze mid-strike, their weapons trembling as she passed. Kale lifted his head, blood streaking his face. For a heartbeat, he saw her as she truly was. Not the warrior he had captured, but the goddess whose name was carved into the oldest stones of his kingdom. His breath caught. Elira, she knelt beside him, pressing her hand to his chest. "You should not have come here," she said softly. "You shouldn't have followed." "I didn't," she whispered. The moon did. The mark on her wrist shimmered. Silver light spread from her palm, sinking into his skin. His wounds began to close, the air crackling with divine energy. The Shadow Clan screamed as the light spread across the field, blinding and beautiful, devouring the darkness that had taken form. When it faded, silence fell. Only the whisper of wind remained. Kale stared at her, still kneeling, his voice rough. "What did you do?" "I ended it, for now." She looked around at the still battlefield, at the warriors frozen in awe. But balance demands blood. Kale. Magic always takes what it gives. He tried to stand, but his strength faltered. She caught him, her touch gentle. "If I could trade my life for this peace, I would," he said. Her eyes softened. "And that is why you cannot die yet." He took her hand, fingers trembling. "Then let me share the cost." Her gaze flicked to him, startled. "You don't know what that means." "You know enough." He pulled a dagger from his belt, slicing his palm without hesitation. "'Tis ye king's oath sealed by blood." He reached for her hand, the steel in his voice unshaken. "Whatever binds you, binds me. Whatever curse hunts you, hunts me too." "Kale, do it," he said, eyes burning with something fierce and unyielding. She stared at him for a long moment, then pressed her palm to his. The blood mingled, silver with red, moonlight with fire. The ground beneath them pulsed once, and the air filled with a sound like distant chimes. The blood oath was ancient, older than her memory, older than kings. It bound two souls as one, their fates intertwined until death or the breaking of worlds. The moment their hands met, the sky split open with light. The moon flared, whole for a breath, and every wolf in the valley fell to its knees. Elira's voice trembled as she whispered the final words. "You have chosen this, Kale. You cannot turn back." "I wouldn't if I could," he said. The glow faded slowly, leaving only their joined hands and the faint echo of divine power still humming between them. She felt his heart beat beneath her touch, steady and strong. For the first time, she realized how mortal he truly was, and how dangerous it was for her to love him. As the dawn broke over the silent field, Kale's army began to stir, alive but shaken. The Shadow Clans had vanished like mist. Only Kale and Elira remained at the center, bound by a promise neither fully understood. She withdrew her hand, the mark on her wrist burning brighter now, reshaped by the vow they had made. "You've tied yourself to the moon," she said softly. "And when she falls, so will you." Kale looked at her, the faintest trace of a smile cutting through the weariness. "And then I'll learn how to hold her up." Elira's breath caught. The wind carried their words away, scattering them into the rising light. Far above, the moon flickered, uncertain, half waning, half whole, as if even it didn't know what destiny had just begun. The dawn after the blood oath rose heavy and strange. The air itself seemed to hold its breath, charged with energy that trembled just beyond human senses. Kale's soldiers moved through the remnants of the battlefield in silence, eyes darting toward the ridge where their king stood beside the woman who had saved them. None dared to speak her name. The whispers of a moonborn spread like wildfire between ranks. Elira could feel their fear, but deeper still, she felt something stirring inside her, a pulse not of blood, but of light. She turned from the horizon, her body trembling as if the earth beneath her feet no longer recognized her. Every sound felt sharper, every breath colder. Her skin glowed faintly in the morning light, the same silver hue that had danced across the battlefield. She pressed a hand against her chest, feeling her heartbeat stutter, then quicken. "It's beginning," she whispered, half to herself. Kale heard her. What is?" She looked up at him, eyes bright with fear and knowing, the awakening. The oath tore the seal I placed on myself long ago. My power is returning." He frowned, reaching toward her as if to steady her. "Can you control it?" "I used to," she said softly, "when I was still more than mortal." The ground beneath them trembled, faint at first, then stronger, like the heartbeat of something ancient buried deep below. Kale instinctively stepped closer, drawing her against him as dust and wind swirled around their boots. Her body burned with light, the glow seeping through her veins like molten silver. She gasped, clutching his tunic, her voice breaking. "It's too soon. It's not ready to wake." "What's not ready?" he demanded. "The goddess," she whispered. "Me." The light flared, blinding, swallowing her whole. Kale stumbled back as the wind roared through the valley, whipping the banners from their poles. The soldiers fell to their knees, some in prayer, others in fear. The moon, still pale in the morning sky, pulsed once, its reflection spilling across the clouds. When the brilliance faded, she was gone. Only a shimmer of silver mist remained where she had stood. Kale searched for her, calling her name into the emptiness until his voice broke. But the air answered only with echoes. The Beta urged him to leave, to regroup, but Kale refused. "Find her," he ordered. Every corner of the forest, every cave, every riverbank, find her. They searched until dusk, and still she did not appear. Ilara awoke beneath the roots of an ancient tree, her body resting in a pool of moonlight. The forest around her was still, the air heavy with reverence. She rose slowly, every movement fluid and weightless. Her reflection shimmered in the nearby stream, eyes glowing silver, markings like threads of starlight tracing across her skin. She no longer looked human. She no longer was. Memories returned in waves, temples bathed in silver flame, worshippers kneeling beneath her light. The oath that bound her to protect the mortal realm. And then, the betrayal. The gods had fallen silent, leaving her to fade into the mortal world, reborn again and again, each life dimmer than the last. But the blood oath had undone what centuries had buried. The moon goddess had awakened once more. She sank to her knees beside the stream, her reflection rippling with the sound of her voice. "Why now?" she whispered to the sky. "Why him?" The water trembled, answering in the language of wind. "Because love was always your undoing." She closed her eyes, pain through her chest, irritating through her chest. Images of Kale filled her mind, the way he looked at her as though he could see past the veil, the warmth of his hand against hers, the oath spoken without fear. He had no idea what he had bound himself to. If she remained near him, the bond would destroy him. The power that kept her alive would consume him, piece by piece, until his soul burned to ash. A soft sound broke her thoughts, the faintest footstep behind her. She turned, and there he was. Kale, mud-streaked, eyes wild with relief and worry. "You're alive," he breathed. She rose slowly, her glow dimming as she forced it inward. "You shouldn't have come." "You don't follow orders well," he said, his voice steady but his eyes searching her face. "You disappeared. I thought that I was gone." Her voice trembled. "I wish I had been." He stepped closer. "But tell me what happened to you." She hesitated, torn between the truth and mercy. The blood oath woke what I had buried. I am not just Ilara, I am Saluna, the moon goddess reborn in mortal flesh. Kale didn't move. The silence stretched between them, heavy and unreal. Goddess," he repeated. He nodded. "And you, Kale, are now bound to me. My fate is your fate. When I rise, you will burn. When I fall, you will fade." He shook his head slowly. "I know. I made that choice knowing what it meant." "You didn't," she said softly. "You couldn't. No mortal can bear a god's burden without breaking." "Then I'll break," he said. "But I won't leave you." The conviction in his voice cracked something inside her. For a moment, the goddess faltered, and the woman returned. She reached for his face, fingers trembling. "You don't understand what you're saying." "I do," he murmured, catching her hand. "You saved me once. Let me save you now." The forest seemed to hush around them, the air thick with unspoken things. She could feel the bond pulsing between them, the blood oath alive, thrumming like a second heartbeat. It was more than magic. It was destiny, ancient and merciless. A cold wind swept through the trees, carrying the faintest whisper of the coming storm. Ilara looked toward the horizon where the sky bled crimson. "It's begun," she said quietly. "What has?" "The return of the darkness that once took my throne," she whispered. "The gods who fell will rise again, and they will come for me." Kale's grip tightened. "Then they'll have to face me first." Her eyes met his, sorrow and love entwined. "You don't know what that promise costs." He smiled faintly. "Then teach." The wind stilled, the forest holding its breath as the moon broke free of the clouds above them. Its light wrapped around them both, soft and haunting. For the first time in centuries, Seluna felt the warmth of something stronger than fate. She knew she should run. Instead, she stayed. And somewhere deep in the forest, the old gods stirred, awake, angry, and waiting. The days after her revelation were drenched in silence. Kale returned to the palace with his soldiers, but victory no longer felt like triumph. The land seemed different now, colder, distant, as if the very soil recoiled from the truth he carried. He had seen her power with his own eyes, felt the pulse of something divine when she touched him. But knowing what she truly was left him raw, a goddess bound to his blood, her fate tied to his by a vow he hadn't understood. He told no one. The court celebrated their return, blind to the fracture beneath his calm. His generals praised him for ending the war, for forcing the shadow clans into retreat, but their voices rang hollow. The truth gnawed at him in every quiet moment. He had fallen in love with something he could never possess, and worse, he had bound his life to hers. Each night he searched for her, but Seluna stayed away. She did not return to her golden chamber, or the halls of men. Some nights he thought he heard her singing beyond the walls, a melody soft and ancient, echoing across the fields like the sound of morning. The moon burned brighter on those nights, and sleep refused to come. On the third night, Kale summoned his council. He demanded reports from every border, every clan, every whisper of the dark forces gathering beyond their lands. His voice was sharper than usual, his patience thin. When one of the commanders hesitated, stammering about the strange lights seen in the mountains, Kale slammed his fist against the table. Then find out what they are, he growled. Or I will. The room fell silent. Even his beta, loyal since childhood, watched him with unease. Imi King, he said carefully, you've not rested since the war. The men speak of omens, of storms that follow your command. They say your temper wakes the wind. Kale's jaw clenched. Let them speak. If storms are what it takes to protect this kingdom, then let the skies break. But the truth was heavier than his pride. Each time he felt anger rise within him, the mark on his chest, the one that bound him to her, throbbed with a faint silver light. It was as though her presence lived beneath his skin, responding to his rage with a whisper of warning. He couldn't decide if it was punishment or protection. That night, he stood on the balcony overlooking the valley. The moon was high, veiled in clouds that glowed faintly from within. His reflection shimmered faintly in the polished stone floor, but when he blinked, another figure appeared beside it, her. Seluna, watching him from the edge of the forest, her eyes glowing softly through the mist. Without thought, he left the palace, descending the marble steps 2 at a time. The guards called after him, but he didn't stop. The pull between them was undeniable, the invisible tether of the blood oath tugging at his heart. He found her near the riverbank where they had once met, her feet bare against the grass, her gown white as frost. You shouldn't have come here, she said, her voice both gentle and distant. Then stop calling me, he replied. She turned to him, sorrow flickering in her gaze. I don't call you Kale. The bond does. You feel what I feel. You rage when I burn. His breath came sharp, anger sparking beneath his ribs. Then unbind it. Whatever this is, this curse end it before it consumes us both. I can't, she said softly. It's beyond undoing. The moon itself heard our vow. He took a step closer. You speak of gods as if they still listen. But they abandoned us long ago. And yet, she said, lifting her hand, you still live because of one. Silver light pulsed faintly between them. Kale caught her wrist, his grip trembling. I didn't ask to be saved. I asked to be free. A freedom isn't given, she whispered. It's taken. But even kings forget that. Her words hit deeper than he wanted to admit. He released her hand, turning away to hide the ache in his chest. You think me a fool, he said bitterly. A man chained by pride. Perhaps I am. But I would rather be cursed than powerless. You mistake power for control, she said. You wield armies, but you can't command the storm in your heart. That's what will destroy you, Kale. Not the gods, not fate. You. He turned to her then, fury breaking through the cracks in his restraint. And what of you? You speak of destiny and sacrifice while hiding in shadows. You, who could move the moon itself, choose silence instead. If you are truly what you claim, then stop running. Her expression changed. Grief, anger, love, all flickered across her face before she whispered, You think I run because I'm afraid? No, I run because I remember. He frowned. Remember what? She looked up at the moon, her voice trembling. You were there once. Another time, another life. You were my guardian, the wolf who swore to protect the light. You broke that vow when the gods fell. The world burned, and I fell with it. And now fate has brought you back to finish what you began. The wind roared between them, scattering leaves across the river. Kale's pulse thundered in his ears. The memory was impossible, yet something deep within him shuddered at her words. Flashes of silver flame, temples collapsing, a woman's cry lost in the storm, it all surged through his mind like fragments of a dream he'd buried lifetimes ago. He stepped back, shaken. "We're lying." Her eyes softened. "I wish I were." Before he could speak again, lightning split the sky. The air turned cold, heavy with the scent of rain and magic. In the distance, the mountains glowed faintly with crimson light, the same the scouts had spoken of. The darkness that hunted her was stirring. Seluna turned toward the glow, her expression grim. "They found me?" Kale reached for her arm. "Who?" "The fallen gods," she said. "The ones who lost their thrones when I fell. They've waited for the moon to waken, and for you to break its seal with your blood." He froze. "Amy blood? The oath bound us," she said. "Through you they can reach me." Kale's jaw tightened, rage and fear twisting in his chest. "And they'll have to kill me first." She shook her head, tears glinting in her eyes. "They won't kill you, Kale. They'll use you. You are the key that can shatter what's left of me." He gripped his sword, the veins in his arm glowing faintly silver beneath the moonlight. "And then let them try." The air trembled. Somewhere beyond the mountains, the darkness answered with thunder. And in that moment, under a fractured moon, the Alpha King's rage became something divine, no longer born of pride, but of love too fierce to surrender. The night the mountains bled red, the kingdom held its breath. The crimson glow that had begun as a faint shimmer now pulsed like a wound across the horizon, spreading tendrils of light that coiled through the clouds. Every wolf in the realm howled beneath that sky, their cries echoing through the forests like a warning carved in sound. Kale stood upon the balcony of his war chamber, watching the heavens burn. Below him, the palace stirred with movement, soldiers preparing, banners unfurling, armor glinting in the trembling light. The scent of iron and smoke hung in the air before a single blade was drawn. He could feel it, the shift in the balance of the world. The blood oath thrummed beneath his skin, hot and restless, as if reacting to the power that approached. Every beat of his heart carried her presence. Every breath felt shared. "Report," he commanded, voice low. His beta stepped forward, eyes shadowed with fear. "The mountains are alive, my king. The rivers run backward. The shadow clans are marching again, but they're not alone. There are shapes in the mist we cannot name." Kale's hand clenched around the edge of the stone railing. "And the goddess?" The soldier hesitated. "She hasn't been seen since that night by the river, but some say she walks with the storm unseen." Kale turned his gaze toward the horizon. He could almost feel her there, moving with the wind, watching from beyond mortal sight. "Prepare the army," he said. "If she fights, we fight beside her." By dawn, the troops had gathered on the plains. The mist from the mountains rolled down like a living thing, swallowing the edges of the forest. The ground beneath their feet quaked with distant thunder, and then the shadows came. They did not march. They drifted, a mass of shifting forms that bled through the fog. Faces appeared within the darkness, distorted, lost, whispering fragments of forgotten prayers. Kale drew his sword. The silver glow along its blade pulsed faintly, mirroring the light that slept beneath his skin. "Hold the line," he shouted, voice echoing through the valley. "No shadow stands against the blood of the moon." The first wave struck like a storm. Blades cut through air and mist alike, though the enemy did not bleed. They shattered into smoke, reforming seconds later. Every strike only slowed them, never stopped them. Kale fought without pause, each motion deliberate, his fury burning hotter than the fire that lit the battlefield. The silver mark on his chest flared brighter with every blow, his bond to Seluna feeding his strength. But it wasn't enough. For every shadow he destroyed, two more rose. The ground trembled beneath a deeper force, something ancient, pulling itself free from the dark. The red light at the mountain's heart surged, and a figure emerged from it, towering and vast, cloaked in black flame. The fallen god. Kale froze. The air grew colder, so sharp it bit through armor. The god's voice rolled like thunder across the plain. "Where is she?" it demanded, the words rattling through bone. "Where is the thief who wears my light?" Kale lifted his sword, defiance in his gaze. "You'll find no goddess here. Only the king who swore his life to her." The god's laughter shook the ground. "Then your death will summon her." Lightning split the clouds. Kale braced himself as the creature raised its hand, and the sky cracked open. A torrent of dark fire fell toward the army, swallowing everything in its path. The world blurred into chaos, Screams, smoke, the scent of burning. And then, from the heart of that ruin, came light. Silver poured from the heavens, pure and blinding. The flames turned white, dissolving into mist. The shadows shrieked, recoiling as a figure descended through the storm. Selûne. Her form shimmered between mortal and divine, hair flowing like liquid moonlight, her eyes luminous with power older than time. Chaol fell to one knee as the air stilled. The goddess landed upon the field, her feet touching the earth like the first drop of rain after a long drought. "You were warned," she said softly. Her voice carried across the valley, calm and terrible. The light does not bow. The fallen god turned, his flames dimming under her gaze. "You have no right to walk this world again, Selûne." "This world was born from my breath," she answered. "And it will not die to feed your pride?" The battle that followed was not of men. The sky itself became their battlefield. Light and shadow twisting through clouds, striking earth with waves of power that split the ground. The soldiers below watched in awe and terror, their mortal fight forgotten. Every clash between them felt like the breaking of creation itself. Chaol's heart ached as he watched her. So radiant, so untouchable. The woman he loved was now something beyond reach, the embodiment of every myth whispered beneath the moon. Yet even gods faltered. When the fallen struck her, his power burned through her divine form, forcing her to her knees. The light around her flickered. Without thought, Chaol ran to her side, cutting through the storm with the last of his strength. He dropped beside her, his hand finding hers. "Get back," she gasped. "You'll be consumed." "You made an oath," he said through gritted teeth. "I don't break those." He lifted his sword, pressing its blade to the mark on his chest. The silver light within him burst outward, linking to hers. Their bond flared, bright, violent, beautiful. The goddess's fading power surged again, renewed by the mortal who had given her his soul. Together, they rose. The battlefield exploded in light. Shadows screamed and burned away. The fallen god staggered, his form cracking with silver veins. "You cannot kill what was made from night," he roared. Selûne's voice was steady, then returned to it. Their combined light struck him like dawn piercing a storm. The god shattered, his form unraveling into dust that vanished into the wind. Silence followed. The red glow over the mountains faded, leaving only the faint shimmer of moonlight across the plains. Chaol's knees buckled. The sword fell from his grasp. Selûne caught him before he hit the ground, her touch trembling. The silver glow around them dimmed, leaving only the night sky above, quiet, endless. "It's over," he murmured. She shook her head slowly. "No, Chaol. Wars like this never end. They only sleep." He managed a faint smile, his voice barely a whisper. "Then we'll wake them together." The goddess looked down at him, torn between love and grief. The bond pulsed weakly between them, fragile, fading. She pressed her hand to his heart, where the mark still glowed faintly beneath his skin. "A rest," she whispered. "You've done enough." As his eyes closed, the moonlight thickened around them, cradling them both in its glow. The soldiers who survived swore they saw the goddess weep that night, her tears falling like silver rain across the broken earth. When morning came, Chaol was gone from the field. Only his sword remained, buried upright in the soil, its blade glowing softly, as though it still remembered his touch. Far away, beneath the dying light of dawn, Selûne walked alone to the mist, her heart heavy with the weight of what love had cost her once more. The battlefield had gone silent. The wind carried only the scent of ash and moonlight, drifting over the ruins of what had been both victory and loss. Selûne stood where Chaol had fallen, her hands trembling, the faint glow of divine light still flickering around her like dying embers. The power that had once burned so bright within her now felt fractured, weakened by the bond they shared. When Chaol collapsed, a piece of that light had gone with him. She could feel it, his life, faint but pulsing somewhere between the worlds. She knelt beside his sword, fingers brushing the hilt still warm from his grasp. The mark on her wrist burned faintly, answering a call she could barely hear. "You can't be gone," she whispered. "Not like this." The soldiers who remained bowed from afar, uncertain whether to approach the being who had just defeated a god. None of them dared to speak her name. To them, she was no longer Ilara, no longer mortal. She was myth made flesh, and myths they knew demanded distance. Selûne's gaze lifted toward the moon, now pale and trembling above the smoke. "Show me where he is," she pleaded. The answer came not in words but in feeling. A pull beneath her ribs, guiding her east toward the river valley where dawn had not yet reached. She gathered her strength, lifting Chaol's sword from the ground. It pulsed faintly in her hand, as though recognizing her touch. as though carrying a fragment of him within. The forest that met her was silent but alive, each branch whispering as she passed. Light followed her footsteps, faint silver trailing through the leaves. Hours blurred into moments, the path twisting between shadow and water. At last, she found him. Cale lay at the river's edge, half submerged, his body motionless beneath the glow of the moon. The water shimmered around him, bending toward his skin as though it, too, recognized the king it once feared. Seluna fell to her knees beside him, her heart clenching at the sight of his still face. His chest barely moved, but she could feel the bond. They were still connected, faint but unbroken. "Cale," she whispered, brushing the wet strands of hair from his forehead. "You stubborn fool. You gave everything." Her fingers pressed against the mark on his chest, and it flickered in response. The silver light that had tied them once before sparked faintly, pulsing against her palm. She closed her eyes, letting her power flow toward him, gentle and steady. The air around them shimmered as moonlight poured from her hands into his body, threading through the spaces between heartbeats. At first, nothing. Then, a breath. Shallow, fragile, but real. Cale's eyelids fluttered, his voice hoarse and broken. "You should have let me go." Seluna let out a trembling laugh that broke halfway into a sob. "You never make anything easy." He tried to move, but pain seized him, a sharp tremor running through his limbs. The battle, the oath, the light. They had burned him from the inside out. She could heal him, but it would come at a cost she was afraid to pay. Her power was waning, the last threads of divinity, unraveling with every use. "Don't," he whispered, sensing her intent. "Oh, don't give what's left of you for me." "I'm not giving," she said softly. "I'm returning what was already yours." She pressed her forehead to his, closing her eyes. The river glowed around them, a circle of light, expanding with every breath. Her voice fell into an ancient rhythm, words that had not been spoken since the gods walked the earth. Cale felt warmth spread through him, burning at first, then softening into peace. His heartbeat steadied, each pulse stronger than the last. When she pulled back, her glow had dimmed. The goddess was fading, her mortal form reclaiming what remained. Cale reached for her hand, his strength returning just enough to grasp it. "You shouldn't have followed me into that storm," he said weakly. "I was born from storms," she replied. "You were the only thing I ever followed willingly." He smiled faintly, though his eyes were shadowed by sorrow. "If the gods see this, they'll call it a sin." "Then let them," she said, brushing her thumb against his. A love was always their greatest fear. The moon broke through the clouds above, casting silver light across the river. For a moment, it felt as though time itself paused, just the two of them, bound in silence, their hearts beating in the same fragile rhythm. But the peace could not last. The bond between them pulsed again, harder this time, a painful reminder that their fates were still tied. He was alive only because she had given him the last of her divine strength. Cale felt it too. "What happens now?" "You live," she said quietly. "And I fade." He shook his head, his grip tightening. "I know. We'll find another way." "And there isn't one," she said, her voice trembling despite her calm. "Every cycle ends the same. The goddess falls so the world can rise again. I won't let that happen." His words came like a vow, fierce and desperate. "You said the bond can't be undone. If that's true, then we end together." "I don't," she whispered. "You don't understand what that means. I understand enough." His hand moved to her face, thumb tracing the line of her jaw. "If I have to walk through darkness to follow you, I will." Tears slipped down her cheeks, silver against the pale of her skin. "You would trade eternity for me?" "I already did." Her breath caught, a small, broken sound lost to the wind. She leaned forward, their lips meeting softly, a kiss both beginning and ending. The air stilled, the river's song faltering. Around them, light and shadow entwined one last time, their bond sealing in silence. When the kiss ended, she looked at him with the weight of 1,000 years in her eyes. "If love is a sin," she whispered, "then let this be our confession." The moonlight dimmed. Her form shimmered, edges dissolving into silver mist. Cale reached for her, but his fingers passed through light. The mark on his chest flared once, then faded, leaving only warmth where the bond had been. She was gone. Cale fell forward, catching the empty air where she had been. The river whispered against the stones, its surface still glowing faintly with her light. He pressed his hand to the water, and for an instant it felt like her touch. Soft, fleeting, eternal. The Alpha King bowed his head beneath the moon, his heart breaking quietly into the night. The kingdom would remember his strength, his victories, his legend. But he would remember only her, his goddess, his curse, his salvation. And as dawn broke over the river, Kale's reflection shimmered once, flickering with faint silver before fading back into shadow. The Alpha King had fallen, not by sword or flame, but by love strong enough to unmake gods. The morning after her disappearance was colder than any Kale remembered. The air felt hollow, emptied of sound, as though the world itself mourned with him. The river beside him ran silver beneath the pale light, carrying traces of her glow downstream until it faded into the fog. He didn't move for a long time, sitting where she had vanished, his reflection rippling on the water's surface. Alone, human, broken. The bond that once throbbed like a heartbeat beneath his skin was gone. Yet sometimes, in the spaces between breaths, he swore he still heard her whisper. When the soldiers found him, they said nothing. Their king looked older than his years, his eyes shadowed, the silver mark on his chest dim, but not dead. They carried him back to the palace, where healers tended to wounds that had already begun to scar, but no balm could reach the ache that hollowed him from within. For days, Kale did not speak. The war had ended, the darkness defeated, yet victory felt like punishment. It was the seer who came first, the same ancient woman who had once warned him that he was binding himself to something not of this world. She entered his chamber at twilight, her steps silent, her eyes bright as frost. "You carry her echo," she said quietly, gazing at the mark on his chest. "And it will burn you until the end of your days." Kale's voice was hoarse. "If this is the price for loving her, I'll bear it." The seer shook her head. "It is not love's price you pay, Alpha. It is prophecies." She reached into her cloak and drew out a scroll, its edges frayed and faintly glowing. "The moon's fall was written long before your birth. When the goddess chose to love a mortal, the heavens demanded balance. The bond you forged was forbidden. To restore what she gave, the world must take something in return." Kale's gaze lifted, steady but hard. "What does it want?" "Her immortality has already been given," the seer said softly. "But the prophecy is not complete. The bond you share still lives, and that means the cycle is unbroken. One of you must pay the final price to end it." Silence thickened between them. The fire beside him flickered low, shadows twisting like ghosts across the walls. "And if neither does, then the curse will linger," she said. "The moon will wane until it fades completely, and darkness will rise once more." Kale stood, the weight of her words pressing into his chest. So even her sacrifice wasn't enough. The seer's voice softened. "A love rarely satisfies prophecy. It only defies it for a while." When she left, she placed the scroll on the table beside him. Its ink shimmered faintly, the language older than the realm itself. He traced the lines with trembling fingers, though he could not read them. Still, the message was clear. Balance. One life for another. That night, Kale wandered the empty halls of the palace. Every shadow reminded him of her, the whisper of her steps, the way her laughter had once softened the world. He stopped before the balcony where they had danced beneath the stars, where the moon had once glowed full and unbroken. Now it hung in the sky as a thin crescent, dim and trembling. He rested a hand over his heart. "If you can hear me," he murmured to the night, "tell me what you would have me do." No answer came. Only the quiet hum of wind against stone, fibbing and stone. But then, faint, soft, almost imagined, he felt warmth spread beneath his palm. A whisper brushed through his mind, her voice woven into the air. "The price was mine, Kale. Don't give the world more than it already took." His breath caught. "A Saluna?" The wind stirred again, carrying the faint scent of jasmine and rain. For a heartbeat, he saw her, her reflection shimmering in the dark glass of the balcony door. She looked as she had before she faded. Luminous, untouchable, her eyes filled with sorrow. "You're still bound to me," he said, stepping closer. "You never left." Your image wavered, flickering between light and shadow. "The bond keeps me near, but not alive. I am what's left of what you loved. A memory trapped between worlds. Then let me come to you." Her head shook faintly. "And no, if you cross the veil, the balance will break. You'll undo what I gave. Still care about balance," he said, his voice breaking. "I can't live with a half-heart." Her gaze softened. "You must. The world needs you, Kale. You were chosen not to follow me into eternity, but to protect what remains. The moon may fall, but the light stays through you." He reached for her, his hand trembling, but his fingers met only air. The image shimmered, then began to fade. "A Saluna." Her voice was faint now, a whisper swallowed by the wind. "When the moon breaks once more, you'll know where to find me." The vision vanished, leaving only silence. Kale dropped to his knees, his hand still outstretched, the mark on his chest burning faintly beneath his shirt. He bowed his head, the weight of her words sinking like stone into his heart. By morning, the crescent moon had dimmed further, and the world seemed to darken with it. Crops wilted, rivers slowed, and the wolves grew restless. Every night, Kale felt the pull of the bond like a thread, tugging him toward the mountains where she had once fallen. The seer's words haunted him. One of you must pay the final price. He gathered his cloak, fastening the clasp at his throat. His sword still waited by the door, its silver glow soft and steady. He touched the hilt, feeling the warmth of her power sleeping within it. Then let it be me, he said quietly. If balance demands a life, it will have mine. As he left the palace, dawn bled faintly across the horizon. The soldiers watched their king ride into the mist alone, saying nothing. They had seen his eyes, calm, resolute, and empty of fear. Above him, the sky began to shift. The moon's pale curve trembled as though holding its breath. Somewhere in the unseen, a goddess waited for the man who had once defied the heavens for her. And in the hush between day and night, Kale rode toward the mountains where love and prophecy would finally decide which would survive. The mountains waited beneath a bruised sky, their peaks shrouded in mist that glowed faintly with the dying light of the moon. Kale rode through the silence, the hooves of his horse, muffled by frost and earth. The air was sharp, every breath colder than the last, yet within him burned a strange calm. A certainty that the path he followed could end only one way. The mark on his chest pulsed with each heartbeat, guiding him like a lantern through the dark. He knew now that it wasn't just a bond. It was a summons. By the time he reached the edge of the veil, night had fallen. The stars were veiled by clouds, and the moon hung weak and thin, its glow flickering as if it too was dying. The wind carried whispers, fragments of voices from somewhere between the living and the divine. He dismounted slowly, his boots sinking into the damp ground, and lifted his eyes toward the hollow where the goddess had first descended. The place still shimmered faintly with her light, as though the earth remembered what the heavens had lost. Kale drew his sword and drove it into the ground before him, the steel ringing like a vow. "I've come," he said quietly, his breath misting in the cold. "If fate wants my life, it can take it here." The echo of his words faded into the stillness. Then the wind shifted, and the light around him began to change. Silver bled into the air, soft and steady, wrapping the valley in a glow that felt both alive and sorrowful. He turned slowly, and there she was, Selena. She stood a few paces away, her form no longer ghost or memory, but something in between. The light of her presence cast no shadow, her hair flowing like water, her eyes deep as the night itself. The sight of her stole the breath from his chest. "You shouldn't have come," she said, her voice carrying both pain and tenderness. "You knew I would," he replied, taking a step closer. "You called me here." Our gaze flickered to the sword planted in the ground. "I call nothing. The bond still lives, even when it shouldn't." "But then let it end," he said. "The seer told me the truth. One of us must pay the final price. If that's what it takes to break the cycle, take me." Selena shook her head, the faintest trace of despair in her eyes. "It was never meant to be you, Kale. Kale, you were the heart that tethered me to this world. I gave you part of my power to save you, and in doing so, I made you mortal and divine all at once. The prophecy was written long before either of us were born. The moon must fall so that the world can rise again." He stepped closer until the silver light touched his face. "Then let the world wait. I won't let you die again." Her lips parted as if to protest, but no words came. For a moment, the goddess faltered, and the woman she had once been shown through, the one who had laughed by firelight, who had danced beneath the stars, who had looked at him as though he were more than a king. "You can't fight what's written in the stars," she whispered. "I fought everything else," he said, his voice rough. "Why not feet too?" The wind picked up, swirling around them, carrying with it the faint hum of distant thunder. The moon shuddered in the sky, its light breaking apart into fragments that rained softly across the mountains like falling embers. Selena looked up, her expression tight with grief. "It's beginning. The heavens are unraveling." Kale caught her hands in his, the warmth of her skin fading even as he held it. "Then we stop it. Together." Her gaze met his, and for a long, fragile heartbeat, the world held still. The bond between them pulsed once more, not as pain, but as something whole. "You don't understand," she said quietly. "If I stay, everything else ends. The balance will collapse, and the darkness we defeated will return stronger than before." "Then go," he said, though the words nearly broke him. "But don't ask me to live in a world without you." A tear slipped down her cheek, bright as liquid light. "You were never meant to love me. That was the god's cruelest trick. And yet I do, he said, his voice barely a whisper. Even knowing it will destroy me. She reached up, cupping his face in trembling hands. You were always meant to find me, in every life. The curse isn't our love, it's the ending. The ground beneath them trembled as lightning split the sky. The mountains groaned, and the river below began to glow with the same silver hue as her eyes. Seluna stepped back, the light around her intensifying until it blurred her form. It's time, she said, her voice breaking. The prophecy demands its price. Kale grabbed her wrist. And no, but she smiled through her tears. You've already given enough, Kale, let me give the rest. Before he could stop her, she pressed her palm against his chest. The mark between them ignited, searing through fabric and skin, binding their hearts one last time. Light exploded outward, so bright it devoured the sky. He felt the warmth of her power surge through him, the bond dissolving into fire and sorrow. Her body began to fade, her light streaming upward toward the fractured moon. He tried to hold her, but his arms passed through air. Seluna. Her voice echoed faintly, everywhere and nowhere. Live for me, that is all I ever wanted. And then she was gone, lifted into the heavens, her light merging with the broken moon until it glowed whole once more. The storm ceased. The valley fell silent. Kale collapsed to his knees, breath ragged, eyes fixed on the sky. The mark on his chest still glowed faintly, warm with her last touch. Above, the moon shone brighter than it had in centuries, its light spilling over the world like forgiveness. For a long time he stayed there, alone in the valley, until the first hints of dawn broke through the clouds. The air was still, the war truly over. But though the world had been healed, Kale knew the price it had taken. He looked at the sword half buried beside him, the steel reflecting the moon's glow. You kept your promise, he whispered to the sky. You rose again. And though no voice answered, the wind brushed against his cheek, and soft, warm like a hand that would never hold his again. He closed his eyes, the sound of her name whispering through the trees. And for the first time since the beginning, he felt peace. The morning after the heavens quieted, the world awoke to a light it did not recognize. The moon, now whole again, lingered faintly in the pale dawn sky, its glow soft but unyielding. Rivers that had run dark through the war shimmered like glass, and the forests whispered with a sound not heard in centuries, peace. Yet Kale, standing alone upon the mountain ridge, felt only the weight of her absence. The air was still heavy with her, with the echo of her last words, the ghost of her warmth. He had survived, but survival no longer felt like victory. The mark on his chest, once brilliant with silver light, had faded to a faint shimmer beneath his skin. He could feel her there still, distant but not gone, like a song whose final note refused to die. He pressed his hand against it, his heartbeat slow, his voice low enough for only the wind to hear. You said the world would rise again, he murmured. But you forgot to tell me how to live without you. He stayed like that for hours, unmoving as the sun climbed higher. The wind tugged at his cloak, urging him to descend, to return to the realm that still called him king. But when he looked down upon the lands below, villages rebuilding, banners fluttering in new light, he saw not triumph, but debt. The people rejoiced, believing the goddess had blessed them, never knowing she had died to save them. He wondered if that was mercy or cruelty. By dusk, Kale began the slow walk down the mountainside, the world around him hushed and reverent. Every sound felt alive, the whisper of leaves, the rush of distant rivers, the cry of a hawk against the fading sky. And then, faintly at first, he heard it, a voice carried by the wind. It wasn't words, not truly, but melody, a hum soft and familiar, woven with the cadence of her laughter. His breath caught. The air shimmered briefly, silver light flickering between the trees. He followed it. Through the forest he moved, guided by that haunting, tender sound. It led him to a glade bathed in moonlight, though the night had not yet fallen. In its center stood a figure, her silhouette unmistakable even in the haze. Seluna, but not as before. She looked human now, her light gentled, her divinity dimmed to something mortal. Her eyes found his, and for a heartbeat, time forgot to move. Kale stepped forward, afraid she might vanish if he blinked. You. His voice broke. You're real. She smiled faintly, tears brightening her eyes. For now, he reached her in 2 strides, his hands trembling as he touched her face. Warmth met his fingers. Not illusion. Not dream. How? The gods kept their promise, she said softly. And they took my immortality, but left me life. I walk as mortal now, bound to the world I once watched from afar. He searched her face, afraid to believe. "And the bond? Are broken," she whispered. "We are free." Free. The word should have felt like salvation, but instead it pierced him with quiet ache. Freedom meant the end of destiny, but also the end of the eternal thread that tied them beyond death. She saw the conflict in his eyes and brushed her hand against his cheek. "I do not mourn what was meant to end," she said. "A love was never a chain, Kale. It was the light that led us through the dark." He caught her hand, pressing it to his heart. "If this is freedom, then let me be its prisoner." Her smile wavered, and for a long, fragile moment, neither spoke. The air between them shimmered with everything they had lost, and everything they still had left. Then slowly, she leaned into him, her forehead resting against his. "You fought gods for me," she whispered. "You gave everything. Let me give you this." Her lips met his, soft, trembling, yet infinite. The kiss was not passion but peace, the closing of a wound carved across lifetimes. Around them, the forest stirred, the air glowing faintly as if the world itself exhaled. The war's echo faded completely in that moment, the remnants of shadow dissolving into nothing. Every scar, every grief, every whisper of the battles fought seemed to bow before that quiet, eternal touch. Kale felt the bond ignite once more, not in chains of light, but in warmth. The kind that lived inside the heart, not beyond it. It wasn't divine. It was human, and that made it more sacred than anything the heavens could forge. When they finally parted, he saw tears glistening on her lashes, silver in the dim light. "You gave the world peace," he said softly. "And I nearly gave it away to keep you." She smiled through her tears. "And yet, here we are." Both sinners in love, both forgiven, the wind moved gently around them, carrying the scent of jasmine and earth. Above, the moon glowed whole and serene, its reflection mirrored in the river beyond. Seluna turned her gaze upward, her expression quiet. "For all their power, the gods could never understand love," she said. "It isn't found in eternity. It's born in moments like this, in hearts that break then choose to love again." Kale drew her close, his arm around her waist, his voice low. "And let this moment never end. It will," she said softly, "but the memory won't. That's the gift of being mortal." He pressed his lips to her forehead, closing his eyes. "Then I'll remember every breath." The night deepened, but the air stayed bright, moonlight spilling across their entwined shadows. The world, once scarred by divine wrath, healed quietly around them, and when the last echo of the war faded from the earth, the wind carried a single truth across the mountains, soft as a prayer. The war had ended, not with blade or fire, but with a kiss. And in that fragile peace, the Alpha King and the fallen goddess began again, not as ruler and deity, but as man and woman, bound not by fate, but by choice. Dawn came softly to the new world. The first light spilled across the valley like gold poured from the hands of the divine, touching the ruins of war and turning them into something almost sacred. Smoke no longer rose from the villages, and the rivers ran clear once more. The wolves, once restless beneath the broken moon, roamed in quiet harmony with the forests that had nearly forgotten them. The realm had been reborn, and in its stillness lay a peace that felt both fragile and eternal. Kale walked among his people with no crown on his head. The title of Alpha King had lost its meaning when the gods fell silent. He no longer needed power to command. His presence alone was enough. To them, he was not a ruler now, but a guardian, the man who had faced the storm and returned. They bowed when he passed, but their reverence was no longer for his strength. It was for his heart. The castle, once echoing with war councils and the clash of steel, now filled with the laughter of children rebuilding their lives. The hall smelled of bread and clean air, the scent of peace that comes only after the longest winter. Kale often stood at the same balcony where he had once raged at the heavens. Now, he watched the world below with quiet wonder, the ache in his chest softened but never gone. Sometimes at night, he still dreamed of her. Seluna walking beneath the moon, her hand brushing against his, her eyes like starlight reflected on water. She would smile, and he would wake with tears he didn't remember shedding. The bond was broken, yes, but love, it seemed, could defy even that. Her memory lingered like breath on glass, fading, then forming again when he least expected. One evening, as the last light of day melted into twilight, Kale stood by the river that had once carried her reflection. The water shimmered faintly, and for a moment he could almost hear her voice, soft, distant, whispering through the reeds. "You've kept your promise," it said. He smiled faintly, though the sound was only the wind. "I had no choice," he murmured. "You would have haunted me if I hadn't. The following weeks brought new beginnings. The harvest returned to the fields, and the packs that had once fought under different banners now worked side by side. Kale saw the same faces that had once looked at him with fear now meet his eyes with trust. He didn't lead them with decrees anymore. He led them with silence, with the quiet strength that comes after surviving everything you once thought would end you. One night, under the full moon, the same moon she had mended with her last breath, the people gathered in the great square to honor her. They lit silver lanterns that floated into the sky, each carrying a wish, a memory, a prayer. Kale watched from the edge, his cloak drawn close, the light of 1,000 lanterns mirrored in his eyes. When the youngest child approached him with one of her own, she held it out shyly. "For the moon lady," she said. He took the lantern gently, lowering to her height. "For the moon lady," he repeated. Then he released it into the air, watching as it drifted upward to join the others, vanishing into the sea of stars. Later, when the celebration faded and only the crickets remained, Kale walked through the empty fields beyond the village. The moon followed him, bright and full, casting a path of silver across the earth. He stopped at the same place where he and Seluna had last stood together, the ridge where the light had first returned to the world. The sword he had left behind was still there, half buried in wildflowers. He knelt, brushing the dirt from the hilt, and whispered, "You would have liked this." The air stirred, gentle and cool. The flowers bent slightly as though in acknowledgement, and then, faintly, he saw it, a shimmer above the sword, barely visible, like a figure made of light and wind. She was there, not fully, not as before, but enough. Her outline traced in moonlight, her smile soft and knowing. "A Seluna," he breathed, his heart tightening in his chest. Her voice came like a sigh, threaded with warmth. "You've built the kingdom I dreamed of." He rose slowly, his gaze never leaving hers. "It wasn't mine to build. It was yours." She shook her head. "It was always ours." Her light flickered gently, reaching toward him though she could not touch. "You gave them peace, Kale. You gave me peace, Kale. You gave me peace." He swallowed hard, the ache in his throat deep and full. "I would give it all again if it meant one more moment like this." Her expression softened, a sadness glimmering beneath her glow. "Then this is your moment," she said. "Remember it." He wanted to say more, to reach for her, to hold her once more as the man he had been, but the wind changed and the vision began to fade. Her light scattered into the air, blending with the moon above. "Oh, don't go," he whispered. But her voice came one last time, barely a whisper on the night breeze. "I never do." The glade grew still. The sword glowed faintly, then dimmed, resting in silence once more. Kale stood there long after she vanished, the weight of both love and peace pressing softly on his heart. When he finally turned to leave, the first light of morning was rising behind him, spilling gold across the hills. The world was quiet, alive, and new. The kingdom had awakened to its first true morning, a realm no longer ruled by gods or kings, but by memory and the promise of love that would never fade. Kale walked down path toward the village, the sun at his back, the moon watching from above. And though he carried no crown and no goddess by his side, he carried something far greater, her light within him, quiet and eternal. Years passed quietly, and time began to soften the world that had once been carved by war and divine wrath. The kingdom thrived beneath skies that no longer trembled, its people living without fear of gods or curses. Children grew up never knowing the sound of battle, their laughter echoing through streets, built on the ashes of old pain. The moon watched over them each night, whole and unwavering, her silver glow a reminder of the love and sacrifice that had restored the light. Kale walked among them as a man without titles. The people still called him Alpha out of reverence, but he no longer wore the weight of the crown. His hair had silvered at the temples, his face lined with the quiet marks of time, yet his eyes held the same depth as before. Still haunted, still searching, he spent his days rebuilding, teaching, listening, and when the world slept, he would find himself drawn to the hills beyond the river, where the wildflowers grew over the place she had last stood. Every night he spoke to her there, though he never knew if she could hear. Sometimes he felt the wind shift, soft as breath against his cheek, and took it as her answer. The sword he had once left buried still stood by the ridge, weathered but strong, wrapped now in vines that bloomed silver in the moonlight. It had become a monument, not to a king's conquest, but to love that had rewritten fate itself. On the eve of the 15th harvest since her passing, Kale found himself restless. The moon hung low and bright, larger than it had been in years, as though drawing closer to the earth it once ruled. The people celebrated below, dancing and singing to honor the goddess who had saved them, but Kale could not join. Something in the air felt different, heavier, almost sacred. It was as though the world was holding its breath. He climbed the hill as he always did, his steps steady despite the years. When he reached the ridge, the valley spread before him in soft gold and silver light. He could hear the faint hum of life, the rivers whispering, the trees breathing, the wolves singing somewhere beyond the horizon. He smiled faintly. She would have loved this peace. He turned his face to the sky, letting the moonlight fall across him, and whispered, "I kept my promise, Seluna. The world remembers." For a moment, only silence answered. Then the air stirred, and the light around him began to shift. A breeze swept through the wildflowers, carrying with it the faint scent of jasmine and rain. Kale's breath caught. The sound came next, not words, but music, soft and distant, the melody she once hummed in the quiet hours between battles. "Seluna?" His voice trembled. The wind grew stronger, swirling around him in slow, graceful circles. The moon brightened, its light rippling across the surface of the river below. And then, in the shimmer of air and light, she appeared, not as she had been before, divine and untouchable, but as he remembered her in her final moments. Human, radiant, alive. Her smile was the same, the gentle, knowing smile that had once undone him completely. "You kept your promise," she said softly. Kale took a step forward, disbelief and wonder colliding in his chest. "You're here." For a moment," she whispered. "The gods granted me one last breath, one last night beneath the world I loved." He reached for her hand, and this time she didn't fade. Her fingers were warm against his, her pulse faint but real. "All these years," he said, his voice breaking. "I thought I'd forgotten the sound of your voice." "You never could," she said with a smile. "And neither could I forget the way you said my name." He looked into her eyes and saw the reflection of the moon, whole and eternal. "You shouldn't have come back. It will hurt when you leave again." "It always did," she murmured. But love was never meant to be painless. It was meant to be remembered. They stood in silence, the night stretching around them like a dream. The air glowed faintly, the line between earth and heaven blurring. She turned her gaze toward the river, her expression soft. "The world is as it should be. You gave them peace, Kale. You gave me peace, Kale. You gave me peace." He shook his head. "You gave everything. I only learned how to live without you." Her hand rose to his face, fingers tracing the lines time had carved there. "You didn't live without me," she said gently. "You lived for me." He caught her hand, holding it against his heart. "Stay," he whispered. "Just this once, stay." Her eyes glistened. "I wish I could, but dawn is coming, and with it, I must return to where the light begins." Kale's throat tightened. "Then let me go with you." She smiled through her tears, shaking her head. "Not yet. The world still needs its guardian of mourning." He looked at her, his heart breaking and healing all at once. "Then at least let me have this one last kiss." Seluna's smile trembled. "The world began with our first one," she whispered. I let it rest with our last." She leaned into him, and their lips met once more, a kiss that tasted of memory and eternity, of everything they had been and everything they had lost. The wind sighed through the flowers, the moon's light wrapped around them like a veil, and time seemed to stop. When Kale opened his eyes, she was gone. Only the faint shimmer of her light lingered on his hands, fading with the dawn. He stood there, the sun rising behind him, the sword gleaming beside him in the light of both moon and day. The kingdom stirred awake below, unaware that their goddess had walked among them one final time. Kale turned toward the valley, the warmth of the sun mixing with the cool breath of night. He smiled faintly, whispering into the wind, "Rest now, my moon. You'll never be forgotten." As the last trace of silver light vanished into the morning sky, the world was quiet once more. The moon lingered pale above the horizon, a whisper of what had been, a reminder that love, once born, never truly dies, and somewhere in the quiet between heartbeats, love began again.